reclaim
because
time
this
when
is
you don't-
bigger than
when you can't-
Watergate.
when I don't answer a question the way
This
you
goes
want.
over 4 administrations. You don't have to go back to Biden. Let's go back to Obama. Let's go back to George Bush. This cover-up spans decades, and you are responsible for this portion of it.
And that's
now,
where the
I want to
most
know at what point.
We need to talk about what just happened in Congress, and I'm warning you right now, this is going to make you furious. What Congressman Thomas Massie just exposed isn't just incompetence. It's not just bureaucratic bungling. This is deliberate, systematic corruption at the highest levels of the Department of Justice. And the evidence is so damning, so clear, that even the Attorney General couldn't defend it without resorting to personal attacks. Let me lay out exactly what happened, because the mainstream media is going to bury this story as fast as they possibly can. Massie stood up in a congressional hearing and accused the Department of Justice of violating the Epstein Files Transparency Act. Now, that's a law that Congress passed specifically to force the DOJ to release information about Jeffrey Epstein's network. It's not a suggestion. It's not a guideline. It's the law. And according to Massie, the DOJ is openly defying it. But it gets worse, so much worse. Massie brought receipts. He held up actual documents from the DOJ's own releases. And what those documents show should shock the conscience of every American. The Department of Justice, the institution that's supposed to protect victims and prosecute criminals, released a list of survivors' names. Real names of real victims who had specifically asked, through their attorneys, for their identities to be kept confidential. Think about that for a second. These are people who were abused as children, people who were trafficked, people who have spent years, sometimes decades, trying to rebuild their lives. Their lawyers went to the DOJ and said, please, protect their privacy. Don't release their names. And what did the DOJ do? They published the names anyway. The result was exactly what you'd expect. Unwanted phone calls, media harassment, their privacy destroyed, their trauma reopened, all because the Department of Justice couldn't be bothered to follow the simple request to protect victims' identities. But here's the sick irony. While the DOJ was exposing victims, they were simultaneously protecting perpetrators. While they were publishing the names of survivors, they were redacting the names of powerful men who allegedly participated in or enabled the trafficking. Massie proved this. He showed the documents. Victims' names visible, perpetrators' names blacked out. That's not an error. That's a priority. That's a choice about who matters and who doesn't. And the DOJ's choice is clear. Powerful men matter. Victims don't. Now let's talk about Leslie Wexner again, because Massie had even more devastating information about how the DOJ has been protecting him. Massie held up a document where Wexner's name was originally redacted. And in that document, Wexner was referenced in connection with child sex trafficking. Not as a witness, not as someone being interviewed. The document allegedly described him as involved in child sex trafficking. And the DOJ redacted his name. They decided that the American people shouldn't be allowed to know that a billionaire former CEO was connected to child trafficking. Massie said the name was only restored after he caught them red-handed, after he exposed what they were doing, after he made it public that Wexner's name was being protected. Only then, only after getting caught, did the DOJ unredact the name. What does that tell you? It tells you the DOJ wasn't planning to ever let that name come out. They were going to protect Wexner permanently. And they only backed down when a congressman caught them and made enough noise that they couldn't maintain the cover-up. How many other names are still redacted? How many other powerful men are still being protected because nobody's caught the DOJ yet? We don't know. And that's exactly how they want it. When Massie confronted Attorney General Pam Bondi with this evidence, when he showed her the documents proving that victims were exposed while perpetrators were protected, when he demonstrated that the DOJ had violated its legal obligation under the Transparency Act, how did she respond? She attacked him personally. She called him a failed politician. She accused him of having Trump derangement syndrome. Let me pause here and explain what just happened because it's important. Trump derangement syndrome. That's what Bondi accused Massie of. Now, Thomas Massie is a Republican. He's a conservative. He's not some anti-Trump leftist. But Bondi threw that accusation at him anyway because that's what you do when you can't defend your actions. You attack the person asking questions. You try to discredit them. You make it about their supposed political bias instead of about the evidence they're presenting. And the evidence Massie presented has nothing to do with Trump. He's talking about DOJ misconduct. He's talking about victims being exposed. He's talking about perpetrators being protected. He's talking about violations of federal law. But Bondi doesn't want to talk about any of that. So she makes it personal. She attacks Massie's motives. She tries to paint him as someone with an axe to grind, rather than a congressman doing his job of oversight. That's the playbook. That's how corrupt officials respond when they're caught, and Bondi followed it perfectly. But Massie didn't back down. He fired back with one of the most important statements you're going to hear about this entire scandal. He said this cover-up has been going on for decades, across 4 presidential administrations: Bush, Obama, Trump, and now the current administration. For decades, the government has been hiding information about Epstein's network. For decades, powerful people have been protected while victims have been ignored. And then Massie said something even more striking. This is bigger than Watergate. Is he right? Let's think about what we're comparing. Watergate was a political scandal. It involved a break-in, illegal surveillance, and a cover-up. It was serious. It brought down a president. It was one of the defining moments in American political history. But what Massie is talking about is the systematic protection of a child sex trafficking network that operated for decades. We're talking about powerful people across business, politics, law enforcement, and entertainment who either participated in abuse, enabled it, or covered it up. We're talking about federal law enforcement agencies that had evidence of these crimes and chose not to prosecute. We're talking about prosecutors who gave sweetheart plea deals. We're talking about the Department of Justice actively redacting names to protect perpetrators while exposing victims. And we're talking about this happening not under one administration, but across 4. Across both political parties. Across different attorneys general, different FBI directors, different leadership at DOJ. That's not just a scandal. That's institutional corruption. That's a systemic failure of justice. That's the permanent government choosing to protect its own, regardless of who's nominally in charge. Is that bigger than Watergate? I think Massie has a point. Because Watergate was about one president abusing power. This is about an entire system choosing to enable child abuse rather than expose powerful people. And here's what makes it even worse. They're still doing it. Right now, in 2026, years after Epstein died in federal custody, months after Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted, the cover-up is still active, the names are still being redacted, the victims are still being exposed while perpetrators are protected. Attorney General Bondi claimed that any errors are fixed quickly. She said they correct mistakes right away. But Massie had a response to that, and it's devastating. He entered into the congressional record a series of documents, completely redacted FBI forms, page after page of solid black redactions where you can't tell who's being discussed or what they did. These aren't from years ago. These are current. These are the documents the DOJ is releasing right now in 2026. If they're fixing errors, if they're committed to transparency, why are these forms still completely blacked out? What possible justification is there for hiding this information from the American people? And then Massie entered something else into the record. A list of 17 people who have resigned over the Epstein Files scandal. 17 people. Think about that. 17 officials, employees, or contractors who left their positions because of controversies related to how the Epstein files have been handled. Who are these people? What did they know? What did they do? Why did they resign? Were they forced out? Did they leave in protest? Did they resign to avoid accountability? We don't have all those answers yet. But the fact that 17 people have resigned tells you how serious the internal problems are. This isn't just Massie making accusations. This isn't just political theater. There are real consequences happening behind the scenes. Real people are losing their jobs over this. But you know what's not happening? The files aren't being fully released. The names are still being protected. The victims are still waiting for justice. Bondi can attack Massie all she wants. She can call him names. She can question his motives. But she can't explain away the evidence. She can't justify exposing victims while protecting perpetrators. She can't explain why 17 people have resigned. She can't explain why FBI forms are completely redacted. She can't explain why it took getting caught for Wexner's name to be unredacted. All she can do is attack and deflect. And that tells you everything you need to know about whether the DOJ is acting in good faith. Let me talk about the Epstein Files Transparency Act for a minute, because this is important context that a lot of people don't understand. Congress passed this law specifically because they didn't trust the DOJ to voluntarily release information about Epstein's network. They knew that without legal compulsion, the Justice Department would protect powerful people rather than expose them. So they passed a law. They mandated transparency. They required the DOJ to release the files. And what's happening? The DOJ is defying the law. They're finding every loophole, every technicality, every excuse to keep information hidden. They're claiming privacy concerns while exposing victims. They're claiming ongoing investigations while redacting decades-old information. They're claiming technical errors when they get caught protecting specific powerful individuals. This is the permanent bureaucracy saying to elected representatives, "We don't care what laws you pass. We're going to do what we want. We're going to protect who we want to protect. And there's nothing you can do about it. Except there is something Congress can do. They can hold hearings like this one. They can subpoena documents. They can hold officials in contempt. They can cut funding. They can impeach. They have tools. The question is whether they'll use them. Because right now, it's basically Thomas Massie and a handful of other members of Congress actually fighting for transparency. The rest are either complicit in the cover-up or too afraid to take on the DOJ. And that's exactly what the DOJ is counting on. They're counting on most of Congress not caring enough to fight. They're counting on the media not covering this story seriously. They're counting on the American people being too distracted or too cynical to demand accountability. They're counting on being able to attack people like Massie, call them failed politicians with Trump derangement syndrome, and have that be enough to discredit them and move on. But here's what they can't count on: the evidence. Because Massie brought the receipts. He showed the actual documents. He proved that victims were exposed. He proved that Wexner's name was redacted and only restored after he caught them. He entered 17 resignations into the record. He showed completely redacted FBI forms. That's not political rhetoric. That's not partisan attacks. That's evidence. And evidence doesn't care about your political affiliation. Evidence doesn't go away just because you call someone names. The DOJ can attack Massie all they want. Bondi can question his motives until she's blue in the face. But those documents are still there. The evidence is still in the congressional record. The American people can still see it if they choose to look. And that's what we need to do. We need to look at the evidence. We need to demand answers. We need to support the members of Congress who are actually fighting for transparency and accountability. Because if we don't, the cover-up will continue. The names will stay redacted. The powerful will stay protected. And the victims will still be waiting for justice that never comes. 4 administrations, decades of cover-up, 17 resignations, victims exposed, perpetrators protected. A billionaire's name redacted until a congressman caught them. Completely blacked out FBI forms. A Department of Justice that responds to evidence with personal attacks. This is bigger than Watergate. Massie is right. And the fact that the Attorney General's response was to attack him rather than address the evidence proves it. The question now is, what are we going to do about it? Are we going to let this moment pass? Are we going to let the DOJ continue violating the law, continue protecting perpetrators, continue exposing victims? Or are we going to demand better? Are we going to support the people fighting for transparency? Are we going to hold our government accountable? Because this is one of those moments where we find out what kind of country we really are. A country where justice applies to everyone, or a country where the powerful protect each other no matter what laws they break or who gets hurt. Thomas Massie is showing us which one we are right now. And it's not pretty. But at least he's forcing us to look. At least he's putting the evidence on the record. At least he's not letting them bury this without a fight. The rest is up to us.